All right, now I'm going to welcome to the stage Brittany Polat. She is our first speaker today. Welcome, Brittany, and feel free to share your screen when you're ready.
Hi, Dan. Thank you. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, everyone can hear. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for letting me be here with you today. My talk is on Stoicism, altruism, and compassion. So this is a topic I've been thinking about a lot lately. And like Dan was saying earlier, compassion is one of those topics that we might come to Stoicism with pre-existing ideas about, right? Maybe you're familiar with Buddhism, maybe from the Christian tradition, maybe just from psychology. And so I like to, kind of like Dan was saying, update some of our ideas and see how we can fit it into our existing framework. Excuse me. So altruism is another one of those topics that we might have some existing ideas about. Philosophers, ethicists like to talk about altruism, and Stoicism actually has some very different concepts that I think can help us not only deepen our understanding of Stoicism, but figure out how to live a good life in this world. So to begin with, let's deal with altruism. What is altruism? You've probably heard this word before, but when moderns talk about altruism, we tend to have this idea that it's just something we do to benefit another person or other people. There's kind of like a dichotomy. So altruism is selfless. You're not benefiting yourself at all. In fact, if you had any kind of selfish motivation, it wouldn't be altruism at all, according to kind of the modern viewpoint, the modern ethical viewpoint. However, the Stoics have a completely different view of altruism and a better one, I think. So for Stoics, we are all part of the whole world, right? We're part of a bigger whole, we're part of a society. We're not just isolated atoms moving around, right? We fit into the bigger picture. And so for a Stoic, when we benefit the whole, when we benefit other people, we are also benefiting ourselves, right? It makes sense if you think about it. We are limbs of a tree, for example, branches on a tree. What's good for the health of the whole tree is also good for our own health, right? Each branch benefits when the tree itself is healthy. We are citizens of a community. It's in all of our interests to make sure that our community is healthy and thriving. And so when we do something to benefit another person in that community, or the community itself is benefiting, that's going to benefit us as well. A famous analogy from Marcus Aurelius is bees in a beehive, right? What's good for the hive is good for each individual bee. Now, I really like this quote from Marcus Aurelius from the Meditations, and there's a lot going on in this quote. So I'd like to read it to you first and then kind of go through and look at exactly what Marcus is talking about here. He says, just as with the limbs of the body in individual organisms, rational beings, likewise, in their separate bodies, are constituted to work together in concert. The thought of this will strike you more forcibly if you say to yourself again and again, I am a limb of the common body, formed by all rational beings. If, however, you call yourself merely a part, you have not learned to love your fellows with all your heart, nor do you yet rejoice in doing good for its own sake, for you're still doing it simply as a duty, and not yet in the conviction that you are thus doing good to yourself. All right, so a lot going on here. First, just to note, Marcus is bringing in this analogy of we are all limbs on the same body, right? So we truly are meant to work together. We all work together to help the body thrive. He also says the thought will strike you more forcibly if you say to yourself again and again. So here, Marcus is giving us a really good practical suggestion for making this seem psychologically real to ourselves, right? It's one thing to sit here and say, okay, yeah, I understand. We're all limbs on the same body. Okay, I get it, right? But when it comes to actually applying it in your real life, it's so hard, right? You're sitting there in traffic, someone cuts you off and you get angry at them. It's really hard at that point to remind yourself, wait a minute, what doesn't cause harm to the hive doesn't cause harm to the bee. In other words, me, right? It's really difficult to integrate this into your outlook on life. And so Marcus is telling us, say to yourself again and again, And this is great advice. Repeat this to yourself every day when you wake up, multiple times a day. Maybe every time someone does something frustrating to you, remind yourself, I am a limb of the common body, formed by all rational beings. Then Marcus goes into something that's really interesting, and he's using a play on words in Greek, the words for part and limb, meros and melos. Doesn't really work in English, but he's saying if you call yourself merely a part, it's not good enough. You have to call yourself an actual limb, integral, right? Not just something that can be easily removed, an integral limb or bee in a beehive, right? So if you're still thinking of yourself as not quite integrated into the whole, then you don't have it right yet, Marcus is saying. We're not doing this simply as a duty. We don't want to do good for others because we have to, right? Just because it's the right thing to do. Oh, I know I should be nice to this person even though I don't want to. That's not the goal here. Okay, maybe that's a step in the right direction, right? Maybe it's better to do something grudgingly than to not do it at all. But you're not yet doing it in the conviction that you are thus doing good to yourself, right? We need to reach this understanding that we're all in this together. We're all part of the same thing. So that's our goal. And I don't think Marcus Aurelius was quite there, but he was working towards it, just like all of us can work towards it today. Now, Marcus is also constantly talking about the common good, right? As emperor, he was the father of his people. He was trying to do what was best for the whole empire. So he's always trying to remind himself to do things for the common good. Now, I'd just like to clarify that the Stoic idea of the common good is not a utilitarian idea that you might hear people talking about today. It's not like the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? This is something different. It's more about fulfilling our nature. We are naturally inclined to care for others. We're naturally part of a human society, of a community, right? It's not about maximizing the good. It's about doing what we as humans are meant to do. And again, Marcus Aurelius has a great illustration of this. We have come into being to work together, like feet, hands, eyelids, or the teeth in our upper and lower jaws. To work against one another is therefore contrary to nature, right? So just like our upper and lower jaws work together to enable us to chew, to talk, right? It wouldn't work if they didn't work together in concert, right? They're naturally made to do this. This is their natural function. And also we are made naturally to work together with other people. So it's not just about doing it grudgingly. It's not about maximizing efficiency. It's actually fulfilling our nature. And therefore, anyone who acts selfishly hurts themselves as well as others. So Stoic altruism is not about, making yourself unhappy so you can do something for someone else. No, it's about realizing that in doing something for others, you're also benefiting yourself. So this really goes beyond duty. It's more about an outlook on life, a mindset, right? It implies a mental and spiritual state of kindness and generosity to others. And I love this quote from Marcus. He says, love people in all sincerity. Love the people among whom your lot has fallen. Love them sincerely, right? It's about that sincerity. And this takes us into the idea of compassion. Now, again, like Dan was saying earlier, this is not a Stoic concept. You might be familiar with this from Christianity or Buddhism or even psychology. This is a popular topic of research in psychology right now. And it's something I've thought a lot. How would we fit this idea into what we know about Stoicism? The Stoics don't have a word for compassion, right? So this is just looking at how would this actually fit into the existing Stoic concepts. So for Stoic compassion, the very first thing to clarify is that it is not about feeling what other people are feeling, right? So the definition of compassion can be murky. People have different ideas of what it actually means. What it definitely does not mean for a Stoic would be to feel alongside someone else, like a co-feeling. Other terms for this would be pity or emotional empathy, where you see someone suffering, for example, and then you start to actually suffer yourself. You're so distressed at their suffering that it engenders emotional suffering in you. No, that's definitely not what we're doing. We work really hard in Stoicism to make our judgments, to make ourselves understand that these things are not the right way of looking at the world, right? Things like death or illness or hardship that distress other people. We work really hard to eliminate the passions about these in our own lives. We certainly don't want to go and reintroduce them because we're feeling sorry for someone else or because we're distressed about someone else's distress, right? So with that said, let's look at how we could actually link this to existing concepts in Stoicism. And I have three areas. One would be patience and kindness. One would be cognitive empathy. This is my term, cognitive empathy. And then finally, the one that I think we can really sink our teeth into is goodwill. So let's look first at compassion as patience and kindness. Now, the Stoics emphasize over and over again that everyone in this world is just doing what they think is the right thing to do. We can see that other people maybe act wrongly, they act unkindly towards others, maybe they're selfish, they're grasping, they try to take things for themselves. They're not doing it because they want to be bad, they're doing it because they haven't understood the nature of the good. They believe that they will be happy if they just get that other thing and elbow other people out of the way, right? They think they're doing what's right. And therefore, we need to exercise patience and understanding towards them. Epictetus says it's like a blind person, right? You wouldn't be mad at them because they're blind. You would try to help them. And likewise with people who try to get ahead in the wrong way, they're not doing it willingly. It's because they don't know any better. And Marcus Aurelius reminds us that we share many of their faults, right? So when you start to judge others harshly, remind yourself that you are prone to the same errors in thinking that this other person is. Maybe you're a little bit more advanced on the path. Maybe you've come across Stoicism and now you have a framework for kind of erasing these errors in judgment. But we're all prone to these same errors. So we need to be sympathetic and understanding towards others, even while disagreeing with them. We can certainly still disagree with someone. We can try to guide them and correct them if possible. We can take action to try to prevent these actions from happening, unkind or mean or unfair actions, right? We should certainly take action to prevent these from happening, but not in an angry way. We want to do so. We want to act out of patience and kindness. And I really like this quote from Epictetus. In his relations with others, a wise person will be tolerant, gentle, forbearing, and kind with regard to one who is unlike him. In other words, someone who doesn't understand the nature of the good. And he will never be harsh with anyone because he fully understands the saying of Plato that no mind is ever willingly deprived of the truth. Right? So if you meet someone who you think is acting wrongly, remind yourself that you're prone to the same errors in thinking and offer them your kindness instead of your judgment. Compassion as cognitive empathy. Now, again, like I was saying earlier, we definitely don't want to literally feel someone else's pain. We want to help them. We want to understand them, but not enter into their distress. Emotional empathy is where you are actually feeling someone else's pain. And this actually leads you to not be able to help them. Mathieu Ricard is a Buddhist monk. He's a translator to the Dalai Lama, and he has this excellent book called Altruism, which I would encourage everyone to read. It's very long, full of research studies, but if you like this kind of thing, it's an excellent book. And he reminds us that when you actually become distressed because of another's distress, it becomes about you. Suddenly, you're not even thinking about the other person anymore. You're thinking about your own emotional distress, your own emotions. And a lot of times this actually leads us to turn away from the other person instead of helping them. We just want to get rid of that bad emotion, right? We turn the other way. We avoid what's making us feel bad. And this is not the way to help anyone. It's not the way to happiness for us or anyone else. So Ricard has a really good analogy. I think he actually says, this is from the Dalai Lama. Imagine you are sitting on an airplane about to take off, and the person sitting beside you has terrible flight anxiety. You can tell they're sitting there grasping the seat, quivering, they're about to panic. You can see this and you can understand that they are afraid of flying, right? However, you know that there's nothing to be afraid about. The flight is safe, it's a beautiful day, it's out of your control anyway, right? Like Epictetus says, you can choose the time of the flight, you can choose the day, but you can't choose what happens after that. So you're not worried, there's nothing to be afraid of. You are then able to offer comfort to this person, whatever you think is the best way, maybe comforting words, a reassuring pat on the back, you distract them during takeoff, whatever it takes, but you are able to help them by offering your calm presence. if, on the other hand, you start to feel anxious as well, you're not going to be able to help them nearly as effectively, right? You're going to be dealing with your own distress in that case. So I think this is a really good analogy for why we're always better off to maintain our own equanimity rather than entering into someone else's pain. It doesn't make you a better person because you feel someone else's pain, right? We want to take it from the emotional level to the cognitive level. We understand, but we don't feel their pain. So Ricard says, the more altruistic love and compassion are cognitive, the more amplitude they give to altruism, and the less they are affected by emotional obscurations, like the empathic distress aroused by seeing others suffering. This is so true. We want to take it from the emotional level to the cognitive so that we are able to help and be more effective. All right, so compassion as goodwill. And I think this is where the Stoics would have really connected to compassion. They had this great word. The ancient Greeks had this word eunoia, which is like good intent, good wishes for another person, like a really deep well-wishing. It's one of the eupatheia, the good emotions that even a wise person would feel. And it's linked to feeling good towards other people, towards wanting to benefit other people. And you may or may not know about the Stoic concept of oikeiosis. There's a lot behind this word. I'm just going to focus on one aspect of oikeiosis right now. This is our growth towards embracing other people in our sphere of concern, right? So it's actually the opposite of alienation. We're all familiar today with this word alienation, right? And the Greeks had a word aliotrosis, which was the opposite of oikeiosis. So alienation would be feeling like you're not emotionally close to someone, right? Even someone that you live down the street from, even someone you live in the same house with, you could be emotionally alienated from that person if you don't consider them within your sphere of care. So the opposite of alienation would be growing closer to others and bringing them within that sphere of what you consider your own, developing that closeness to them. We don't want to feel that we're separate from others. We want to feel like we all belong together, right? So going back to this idea of the common good, of we're all limbs of the same body, we're all branches on the same tree. This is part of oikeiosis, is bringing people into your sphere of concern. A human being finds delight in doing what is proper to a human being. And what is proper is to show goodwill to our own kind, right? So this is what makes us flourishing, that deep, rich happiness that the ancient Greeks called eudaimonia, right? It's this constant good wishing towards others and finding delight in showing this goodwill. All right, so how do we cultivate goodwill? This is the question, right? Again, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I understand that. I get it, makes sense. How do we actually do it? Well, it's hard. There's no getting around that. But if you constantly practice, if you every day sit down and think about this, you will make progress. So first of all, to bring others within your sphere of care, we need to be very aware of what we're doing, of our attitude towards others. And anytime you disagree with someone, maybe make a mental note. Okay, I still am going to bring this person within my sphere of care. Someone that you don't approve of. Maybe they have a different lifestyle that you don't approve of. Maybe you disagree with them politically. Whatever it is, they are still a person worthy of your care. You can still disagree with them. You can still believe that they are misguided while caring about them in a humanitarian sort of way. The same applies to people that you don't like or people who mistreat you. You can defend yourself. You can take action. Stand up for yourself while still being respectful and remembering that this is a person. Maybe they're misguided, but they're still a person deserving of your care. And then the same applies to people that you don't even know, right? People on the other side of the world, people on the other side of your community that you just haven't met yet. So take time every day, build this into your morning meditation, your evening reflection. Think about someone that day that you maybe disagreed with or butted heads with in some way. And then think about cultivating goodwill and say to yourself, I'm still a member of the same family with this person. We're still branches on that same tree, even if I disagree with them. Also, celebrate the virtues of other people. This especially applies to people that you know, but also people that you don't know so well. people that you hear of someone doing something nice, celebrate that, right? When you want to gladden your heart, Marcus Aurelius tells us, think of the good qualities of those around you, the energy of one, the modesty of another, the generosity of a third, and some other quality in another. For there's nothing more heartening than the images of the virtues shining forth in the characters of those around us. So be sure to keep them ever at hand. Again, the key is that last phrase, ever at hand. Keep them ever at hand. Keep them ready. Pull them out if maybe you're having a bad day. Do this in your evening meditation when you feel yourself starting to get frustrated or angry. Celebrate the virtues of someone else, and this will help you to cultivate goodwill and good wishes toward others. All right, so I went through this pretty quickly today, but I do hope it gave you something to think about, thinking about yourself in relation to other people, maybe some strategies for implementing goodwill and compassion in your own life. I do have some websites you can check out if you'd like to know more, livinginagreement.com, stoicare.com. I'd like to especially mention with Stoicare, this is a website that I started this year with Eve Riches, and we're really focused on bringing care and Stoicism together. So anyone who's in a caregiving role in your personal or your professional life, so this would be parents, teachers, community workers, social workers, anyone who cares for anyone else in any capacity, which should be all of us, right? So we're really trying to give you some concrete strategies for thriving, for dealing with stress, reducing burnout, those kinds of things. So please check out our site. You can also find me on Twitter at Brittany Polat. And that's all. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Brittany. That was a beautiful PowerPoint slide presentation. Great imagery. We do have some questions that I've collected for you. First, I'm glad that you started with the example of bees in a hive, because it occurs to me that we're not just trying to be better people as as Stoics. We're trying to learn a better human nature, but we can learn from nature at large, even bees. Isn't it amazing that the number of things we can learn from nature is really endless?
It is, yes. And I think a lot of us take inspiration from nature as well. And this is, there are lots of meanings to the Stoic idea of nature, right? I can't go into all of them right now, but it's definitely a source of inspiration, both the natural world, thinking about the world as a whole, the things that are outside of your control. All this is part of nature. So yes, this idea can really guide our behavior.
Good. And another question about this bees and the hive is, Greg asks, I thought that what doesn't cause harm to the bee doesn't cause harm to me could be logically reversed to say, therefore, what causes harm to me causes harm to the hive. Could it not? Any thoughts?
Well, so Stoicism is all about kind of rising above yourself. And I think this is actually a key to wisdom in many cultures. I think it's the key to wisdom in Buddhism, in a lot of cultures around the world, is getting outside of our own ego. So, and it's one of the hardest things to do, right? But for me personally, for example, when I look for a Stoic role model or someone I think is wise, someone to help me, I'm always looking for someone who is able to kind of take that broader view, that broader perspective. So I think a lot of the meditations by Marcus, he's really trying to do this. He's showing us how to do this. The view from above is one of the most famous ways, right? So if you're not familiar with the view from above, that's where you kind of practice a zooming out exercise. Marcus says, imagine you're standing on a mountaintop, or for me personally, since we today have our view of the earth from space, I like to think about looking down on the earth from space somewhere. But it really emphasizes, hey, I'm just, I'm a small part of this. I'm like an hour passing away, to use a phrase from Epictetus, right? We're just here for a moment. Let's enjoy the beauty of the earth that we have. Let's not get upset about these things that really aren't that big a deal in the big picture. And let's just focus on what's important here. And what's important is making your mark for other people, right? Is doing what benefits the bigger picture. So this is psychologically a very, very difficult thing to do, but it's so important. I don't think that you can really make progress towards happiness without developing this bigger, broader viewpoint. So yes, that's something that's very important to point out. Thank you.
And that leads to the next question is, you included the idea of selfishness in your presentation. And, you know, it occurs to me that a lot of society, with its superficial way, and it's implying a kind of selfishness. So we are working as philosophers or practicing Stoics, we're working against a big trend. It's going to be quite a lot of work to get over this.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, this has always been a problem, right? You read some of the things that Seneca writes about ancient Rome and you recognize it right away, right? People just having crazy, excessive dinner parties and things that don't make them happy at all and are just way over the top. And then you see things happening the same way today, and you know it's been like that forever. But I do think that we do have some special challenges, like you mentioned earlier, social media. It's a mixed blessing, right? We're coming together as Stoics through social media, so we can use it for broadening our minds and becoming better people. But at the same time, there is so much that's coming through that tends to not make us better people. So it's hard to kind of filter that out. So we do have these challenges coming towards us that I think Stoicism can help with. And that's the great thing about Stoicism, right? Human nature is still the same as it always has been, even if we have somewhat different circumstances. And so going back to disciplining your mind, right? Asking yourself, is this true before you assent to something? Can really help on social media, I think. Also, just taking time to get your mind out of the news cycle. I think I like to describe this as taking a break from the time bound and going to the timeless. So timeless things are thinking about nature, for example, thinking about virtue, elevating your mind a little bit instead of just constantly being tied to, you know, like I said, the news cycle, which we know is not conducive to anyone's mental health these days, and just try to take that big picture and let your mind soar a little bit, I guess.
Thanks, Brittany. The next question is from John, who says, for me, emotional empathy doesn't feel like a choice. I can see that it is not useful, but I don't know how to set it aside. Any tips? It seems to me that people have natural levels of empathy and that it's not a learned behavior, so not so easy to turn off. What do you think of that?
Yeah, this is a great point. And this, to be honest, this is something I've struggled with as well. One reason that I chose to talk about compassion is because this whole year I've been researching it, because I too feel that, you know, that natural pull towards getting distressed. And I will just say that Stoicism, when we're talking about nature or something that's natural, we're not just talking about things that naturally occur. The Stoics were very much looking at ideal human nature. And I think that's important to point out, because a lot of us have the idea, especially if you look at psychology research today, anything that so psychologists tend to maybe take a poll of people, do a survey, have them fill out a questionnaire, and then tabulate the results and say, okay, so this is the natural way. It's like the norm, what the average person does. Stoicism, on the other hand, was more interested in the best version of humans. So their normative human, the person that they model their behavior on and the person that they base their thoughts about what's normal, is actually the sage, right? So it's a different idea of what's normal. It's not just, hey, take the average person in the street and see what they do. It's what's the best way of doing things? What's the best representation of human nature we can have? What's excellence, right? We're aspiring to excellence. So yes, emotional empathy, like all of the passions, you know, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, anger is natural. So what are you talking about that it's natural to not be angry? Right? The same for all of the passions, all of these negative emotions. They're knee-jerk reactions. They do come to us naturally. But what we aspire to do is meet the best that nature can offer. So I just wanted to point that out, that when we talk about natural, it's kind of a different meaning than what a lot of people in the 21st century are talking about. Just to kind of tell you about my progression, I guess. I have 3 children, and I found that when I had my children, I became a lot more empathic than I was before. And I started getting really upset whenever I saw a child suffer, not just my own kids, but anyone in the world. I'm a total sucker for those pictures of, the orphans or refugee children suffering. And, in the past, it's been so bad that I would just have to turn off my computer, just feeling so much distress. And so I've been there. I totally understand what you're saying. Now, what we have to work towards is, I think you can do this on several levels. Probably the easiest level is to remind yourself that it's not useful at all. And I know this isn't really getting to the heart of that emotion, but it's something that you can train yourself towards every day. This is not going to happen overnight, right? It's a long training process, just like getting rid of your anger or whatever emotion you happen to be struggling with. I think people have different kind of emotional struggles. Some people it's anger, some people it's guilt, some people it's anxiety, right? So if you happen to be especially prone to this emotional distress that comes with empathy, identify that, be aware of it, and work on it every day. Now, part of what we're doing is reminding ourselves that this is kind of like the Buddhist idea of compassion, where people are kind of misinformed about what's important. It's the way that you see it, right? It's distressing because you see it as distressing. It's not actually distressing because somebody else could look at the same thing and not see it that way. So that's how you know it's in your mind that's causing you the distress, right? This is the way the world is. Now, part of that view from above, or that zooming out and accepting things, is understanding that there will always be suffering in the world, right? There is absolutely nothing any of us can do to get rid of that kind of physical pain. So before we can move past it, we have to accept it. So that would be my second suggestion, is to work on, expanding your acceptance of the world. I don't think I can go into that really deeply today, but there's a lot of Stoic literature. There's a lot of Buddhist literature, a lot of psychology literature about reaching acceptance of the way the world is. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you can't work to help, alleviate that. We can do that by sharing Stoicism with people. We can do that through work, volunteering, actually feeding the hungry and that kind of thing. But you're never actually going to make progress until you reach a certain level of acceptance. So I would say work on your acceptance, and also remind yourself that it's not actually helpful, and then focus your energy on what you can do. Instead of sitting around thinking about the pain of that person, get up, go outside of your house and volunteer, as long as you're not in the middle of a pandemic, right? Or volunteer online. There are a lot of things you can do online as well. Stoicare.com, the website I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of online resources for online volunteering. So channel your energy into actually helping, and that will make you feel better as well. So I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit.
Very good, Brittany. Part of what you said also made me think of the need for acceptance in a modern world, when people have different opinions and when society is teaching us to react even without thinking, like, oh yeah, I'm for this or I'm against this. I think social media, like you mentioned, is a technology that is neutral. It's not inherently good or bad. Like, for example, as you said, today we're using social media to learn about philosophy and Stoicism. So we have to remember that the technology is neutral. It's how we are learning things from culture. And instead of what it's teaching us, the quick decision, or as Daniel Kahneman said, system one thinking, I believe, which is the quick knee-jerk reaction, that may have been helpful in our history as human beings. But now, if we're using that for everything, then we're, of course, making a lot of fast decisions. We're increasing the number of mistakes we can make. And of course, we're not learning to accept things, sometimes things that are beyond our control. So yeah, this lived philosophy, maybe Stoicism and lived philosophy is coming back because people realize that they're not getting the right training.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have an illusion today that we have more control over things than we actually do. In some ways, humanity has actually gained more control. You know, we have our medical care is so much better today than it was in the past, so that we don't have to deal with as many illnesses, for example, or malnutrition in the same way that people in the past did. We have unprecedented control over our environment. For example, you know, we're building things, we're mining things, we're able to travel from one continent to another in a matter of hours, right? So in a lot of ways, we have gained more control over our environment than in the past. Now, I think that lulls us into a false sense that we do have control over things that we don't actually have control over. So yes, maybe in that way, it's also an additional challenge for us to actually pull back and remember that we don't have control over most of this.
And to take this a step further, I don't see any other questions in the chat window, so I'm going to add one of my own, is to using the tools that Stoicism gives us, like acceptance and the idea of externals and such. Maybe we can use this to get closer to people today, even though they may be separated from us by geography or pandemic. We can focus on, I heard this somewhere on the internet, focus on your 10 best friends on Facebook instead of trying to just post things for 1,000 of them. You know, get to know 10 people better, because there's that other concept that you are like the 10 people or the close friends around you.
Yeah, that's true. And I do think we have, you know, again, we have a mistaken idea that we're more influential than we really are. You know, everybody wants to change the world. And statistically speaking, we can't all change the world in a good way all the time, right? Sometimes we just have to go along with the way things are. But we can do our part and, you know, provide that calm and happy, peaceful presence in our own life and touch those people around us. Sometimes we are in a position to do more, sometimes we're not. So I think part of wisdom is developing that judgment as to where you can actually make the most good. So I like what you said. Think about touching the lives of the people around you instead of maybe trying to do too much.
Now, thinking forward, what do you picture as the future of your Stoic Care website in the next couple of years? What directions will you be going into?
Oh, good question. Eve and I are still thinking about that, but we do have some things coming up that I think are exciting. Next year, at some point, we're doing an online workshop for nurses. And we are working in partnership with a nursing professor who has put together, I think it's about a 3-hour curriculum, completely integrating Stoicism and nursing. So look for announcements for that. Anyone who's interested can subscribe to Stoic Care and get updates for what we're doing. We'd really like to make it kind of an online hub, like a community for people to find each other. Because I think that's one of the issues here. You know, a lot of us are individually finding that Stoicism helps us, but then we don't really have a forum to talk about, okay, Stoicism in teaching or Stoicism as a doctor or whatever. So we're really trying to just bring people together so they can find each other and talk about it and feel like they're not alone, right? To converge on maybe best practices for that profession and things like that. So long-term kind of community building. And by the way, we're completely open at this point. If any of you watching have ideas, if you are a caregiver in some way and you'd like to propose a workshop or you'd like to write a blog post for us, we really do want to bring people together and listen to your ideas. So please feel free to get in touch through the blog or like I said, on Twitter, you can find me.
Great. We have time for one more question. Brittany, I'm sorry. Lauren is asking in the chat window, Brittany, can you provide techniques for accepting the world and all its miseries as it is?
Well, I don't think I can provide better techniques than Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. So maybe go back to the dichotomy of control. That would be the most basic one, like Dan was mentioning earlier. You know, focus on what you can control. And I think part of what we're doing in Stoicism in general is just training our minds, right? We're learning to gain control of our thoughts, mastery of ourselves. So the more you practice this, the more you're able to tell your mind, no, don't go in that direction. It's not helpful for you. Go in this direction. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, I've been practicing Stoicism for 5 years now. I know there are people here who have been practicing longer than that. And it's not going to happen for you overnight. It takes dedication. You have to work on it. But I can tell you, if you work on it, it will help. You will get better. Your happiness level will increase. Your stress level will go down. It will happen. You just have to keep at it, right? And this is something the ancient Stoics knew. They looked at this as kind of a lifelong progression. You know, I'm in my 30s now, so I'm hoping, but you know, hopefully, fate permitting, I have a lot more years to work on this. If I don't, then I can say, well, I did my best in the time that was allotted to me, right? So I would say, be patient with yourself as you're working towards this, but stay committed. You know, this is one of those things, accepting the world as it is and all the miseries in it. That's it, right? That's the task of our lives. Once we can do that, we will have achieved wisdom. So read the meditations, read Epictetus's discourses, put it into practice every day. Stoic journaling is popular. Keep a journal for yourself. I personally don't journal, but I do reflect every day. The more you can keep these concepts in your mind, the more you're training your mind to be able to tell yourself, this is not good for you. Think about this instead. And you can gain mastery over your thoughts like that. I think a lot of people connect that with insight meditation and Buddhism, right? This ability to actually decide what goes into your mind and what doesn't. And that takes long training. Same with Stoicism. What we're trying to do is develop a different way of seeing the world, a different way of being in the world. And it just takes time. So focus on the dichotomy of control, focus on the big picture, you know, thinking about the fact that you are in this world as a very small part, right? And the world is not going to change what it is. It is what it is. Find the beauty in the world, you know, enjoy being a small part of it, and appreciate what you have as well. So it's kind of a very general answer, but I think that this is the whole task of Stoicism. And so just keep working at it, just keep at it every day, and you will see progress.
Very good. Well, the comments in the chat window, they liked your presentation, Brittany. Thank you so much for presenting today. I enjoyed it as well. And we're going to take a 5-minute break before the next speaker. Tim, he's up next.